Well, hello everybody and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DaCosta and this is Consistent Preterism. Thank you for joining me today. It's great to have you. I'm actually recording this on Fajas Day, so happy Fajas Day to all the Fajas out there. Although I may not actually share this until Tuesday, maybe even Wednesday. I don't know. Sometimes I pre-record and share when I know that I'm able to partake of some comments and whatnot. So we'll probably share this midweek, but hope everybody's having a great Fajas Day. I'm actually headed to Home Depot to grab some things. I'm building some shelves in my shed. I just have far too much crap in it, and so I need to elevate and de-escalate the situation. And anyways, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to answer a question that came through at least 7 times on a video last week. It's from a man named Mark Johns. Now, I know Mark Johns has commented before. I recognize the logo and the name, excuse me. And so I know that he's very much open to IO and very interested in IO. I don't know if he's a Christian or not. I don't know much about the guy. But a smart cat definitely, articulates his thoughts well. And so he put forth a question. Now, if you remember from yesterday, I told you that YouTube has been effing with me royally. Not royally, but really. Not really, but royally. Yeah, they've been effing with me. They don't allow people's comments to post, probably at least 50% of the time. And they also don't allow a lot of my comments to post. I told you that if you put a cuss word or anything controversial, it may alter the ability to have your comment posted. So keep that in mind. Also, the length of the comment seems to trigger the algorithms and cause blocking too. So that's probably what it was. This guy's comments are usually particularly on the longer side. So this one was on the longer side because, again, like I told you, I get notifications of comments in my email and I can click on them and open them up almost all the way. And then when I click on them to go to reply, they're not on the video. I just see them in my email, like posted on my YouTube video. It's very bizarre. Still trying to work it out. But here's a recommendation. If you have a long comment and it's not posting, if you keep trying to post it, because I saw like 7 or 8 emails from this guy trying to post this thing. And it's funny because he'll keep saying like, this is the 5th or 6th time I've tried to post this. And it's very frustrating. Trust me, I get it. But if you have a question that that is lengthy like this, and you want to get it to me, you can always email it to me. I've put my email out there before. And so, yeah, you can always email it and we can discuss it that way. But I did see enough of this guy's question so that I wanted to make a video on it and talk about it, because it's one of the handful of what I call loophole passages that people cling to in the New Testament and the Old Testament when they're trying to fight against the truth of IO. And a loophole passage is simply a passage that, to us IOers, it's like, well, first of all, it's a tricky passage. Let's put it that way. And it also, besides it being tricky, if it were indeed a passage that people today could cling to for their faith and their hope, then to us IOers, it would be sitting in the middle of an ocean. And what I mean by that is, these passages that are brought forth, specifically this one in Matthew 22, the parable of the wedding feast, these passages, if they are little glimmers of hope for all humanity outside and apart from the mission to save all Israel, then they sit on a little tiny island in the midst of shark-infested waters, because they're all alone, right? There's so few of them. The 98% of the Bible can be pointed directly to Israel, even in the New Testament. That's not just the Old Testament. That's the New Testament as well. That's why we are all IOers. Because if you look at the New Testament and what it's fulfilling and what it's saying and what Paul is using to describe what's happening, the 2-stick analogy, obviously the 2 branches in Romans. Come on, Ezekiel, the house of Israel, the house of Judah. What about Paul asking about the Gentiles and quoting all passages about Israel, right? The parable of the prodigal son with Jesus, the 2 brothers. One brother goes away, he comes back from the nations and the Father accepts him again. I mean, there's so much stuff that you could link. It's abundant. Excuse me. 2 Peter or 1 Peter. You were once not a people, now you are a people. This is exactly what God said the children of Israel would become. Once not a people, but then would have mercy. So, I mean, it could go on and on and on. So, we are looking at the story as an IO story, as a story about Israel, because that's really what the focus is on. And if anyone ignores or rejects that, they're a bonehead. I don't think many people would. They just like to throw a little cherry on top and say, but wait, there's more. There's a gospel mission 2.0, right? So that's the first thing I would say, is that if it is indeed the fact that Matthew 22 is the place where all people in 2021 can go and glean hope from and grab on to the coattails of Jesus, right? If that's the case, then it sits alone and it really doesn't have much support anywhere else. Let's see if I can elaborate this a little bit or elaborate on this. This portion in Matthew 22 seems to be tricky for a lot of people, especially objectors to IO. Some suggest that this is the one hidden loophole in all of the New Testament that somehow says that the wedding feast is ongoing and still somehow yet future. All right. So the first thing I would say when answering something like that is besides the loophole argument, it can't just be the one passage that people glean hope from. I mean, that's ridiculous. Matthew 22, really? As if that's the one spot where God wanted you to go. But first I'd say that it cannot go against the Everest-sized mountain of scriptural proof, which says the contrary. That needs to be stated first and foremost, because if a passage, Matthew 22, for example, clashes with 98% of the other passages, then chances are it's not clashing, it's just a little bit on the tricky side, or it might be worded a little bit differently. Okay? Secondly, this is a parable, okay, which is pretty much just a symbolic way of getting a point across. And I don't think everything's always black and white or, concrete or stiff wooden literal in these parables. I think the wording here in this particular parable is, it's a little, or it's such that it kind of bounces around, right? It's not perfectly chronological in its order. Why do I say that? Well, if you look at the other wedding feast parables, right, the bridegroom wedding feast parables, because there's a few of them, right? This isn't just the only one. I always recommend going to the other places in Scripture and actually looking to see how that person accounts for that same event. It usually sheds a lot of light on it. Or it will at least take away the argument that it's against the IO perspective, right? But if you look at, say, Matthew 25, for example, the wedding, the same parable, the same account, look at how it's described here. And while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Okay, now think about that. So, Mark Johns, in his email, clearly believed that Matthew 22, the parable of Matthew 22 in the feast, the wedding feast, may be his and others' way into Israel's salvation story, right? Well, first of all, what are they being saved from? We don't even understand that. They're being saved from the curse of Israel's law, right? That's the whole point. He's the end of the law to those who believe. This isn't a moral heart law. This is the literal law of Israel, the handwritten requirements of the law, as Paul called them in Colossians. That's what he's saving them from. He was born into the law to redeem those under the law. Cursed is everyone who does not continue to do all things which are written in the book of law. Not in the heart, in the book of law. Okay? So that's what the curse was about, plain and simple. But notice Matthew 25 just shuts it down and says, and those who were ready when the bridegroom came, they went into the marriage feast and the door was shut. Now that's pretty harsh language. Okay, hang on one second here. A lot of commotion, a lot of traffic. Just making sure I don't get hit here by this big ass truck. All right. So the door was shut, right? Nobody's coming in after the door is shut. And notice that those who were ready when the bridegroom came were able to go into the marriage feast in this particular account. Those who were ready when the bridegroom came. Well, when did the bridegroom come? Does anyone want to argue that? No, only a fool like Shitterly and other futurists would argue that. But most futurists don't want anything to do with that argument because Jesus does not like their argument when it comes to that argument. Jesus says that he was coming back in that generation and before some standing there died. The bride, right? The New Jerusalem was tailgated or spun off of or off the tail end of the Old Jerusalem. When the Old Jerusalem fell, John saw the New Jerusalem prepared as a bride. There's that bridegroom language. And of course, we know that Jesus was the bridegroom and he was coming for his bride, right? That's Israel, right? And this goes even deeper into the Old Testament because Israel's always said to be the bride, right? God was going to restore them and take them as a new bride and whatnot. And Hosea is about the unfaithful bride. And so this is nothing new when it comes to Israel. And here we have the language, the bridegroom coming. But notice those that are ready when he comes get to go to the feast and the door is shut. Now that's pretty clear language if you ask me, people. So what does this mean, right? So clearly we have one account of the feast as showing completely shut, only those that are ready when he comes. And then we have another account in Matthew 22, which makes it seem like the invitation's going out to Israel first, and they're rejecting it. So then he burns up their city and then takes it to the highways, right? That's sort of the order of the text in Matthew 22, right? Now, just looking at that from a surface glance, if you know anything about the New Testament, you know that clashes with every single thing that we know, right? It really does. Come on, lady. One day you guys are going to witness me getting into an accident. It's going to be a little comical, but this lady's speeding up. I need to go to Lowe's. Let's see. Hold on, bear with me 1 minute. But doesn't that clash with everything we know, folks? I mean, here we have the city burned up, right? The city's going to be burned up, so the end was going to come, and then the gospel was going to go to the nations? No, that doesn't work. Because Jesus said in Matthew 24:13 that this gospel of the kingdom will go to all nations, and then the end will come, right? So big time problems if you take that view. If you take the literal, strict wooden, literal, chronological view of the parable, the symbolic parable, nonetheless, of Matthew 24. In my opinion, what I just showed you from Matthew 25 is far more powerful because it shows that those who are ready when the bridegroom came were allowed in and the door was shut. It shows a conclusion. But at the very least, we can agree that it's 1-to-1, right? There's one passage for and one passage against. So technically, they would nullify each other out, right? They would void each other out. We can't take Matthew 25 if Matthew 22, if Matthew 25 says that the door would be shut and only those who are ready at the coming, right? So you can see how we're in shaky, tricky waters here. And you don't want to hang your hat completely on this point. But look at Luke, Luke's account of the wedding feast. It says, verse 16, "Then he said to him, a certain man gave a great supper and invited many, and sent his servant at supper time to say to those who were invited, 'Come, for all things are now ready.' But they all with one accord began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'I have bought a piece of ground, and I must go and see it. I ask you to have me excused.' And another said, 'I have bought 5 yoke of oxen. Please excuse me.' Still another said, I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. So that servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house, being angry, said to his servant, 'Go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the city, and bring in the poor and the maimed and the lame and the blind.' And the servant said, 'Master, it is done as you commanded, and there is still room.' Then the master said to the servant, 'Go out into the highways and hedges, and compel them to come, that my house may be full,' or filled. For I say to you that none of those men who were invited shall taste my supper." Okay, so notice here in Luke's version of this account that the invitation to the wedding, to the feast, is going out to the streets before the marriage supper, right? Well, that's clear, right? Because he's commissioning them to go out to the streets, to the highways, to the byways, right? In my opinion, that's the nations. He's saying go far and wide, and get them, invite them, compel them to come, right? But where are they coming, right? They're going to the wedding feast. So the wedding feast is still yet future while the invitation is going out, right? Okay. And again, it says, so that my house may be filled. Matching, of course, what we just saw in Matthew 25 about the door being shut. You know, the house would be filled and the door would be shut. But if you actually take a careful look at the Matthew 22 passage, you can see that yet again, the invitation is going out to the same highways that Luke spoke of, same exact wording. And of course, in Luke, we see that that's happening before the bridegroom comes, before the wedding. Right? Doesn't make sense to invite people to a wedding that already occurred, right? That would essentially be the argument if someone is going to use Matthew 22, or if a preterist at least, because futurists still see the wedding and the coming as in the future, which is bonkerdoodle, banana ham sandwich. All right, but if the coming already occurred, which we know it did, because Jesus said it would, and it coincided with the fall of Jerusalem, the mother of all harlots, the city that was drunk off the blood of the prophets. Remember Jesus, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how you killed the prophets? I wish you would turn to me, blah, blah, blah. It's all about Jerusalem. Old Jerusalem would fall, leading to the inheritance of the new Jerusalem, which was the final picture. So what's the point here? Well, the point is, if we know that the bridegroom came and redeemed his elect when he said he would, remember, Paul says that the order of the resurrection would be Christ the firstfruits, then those who are Christ's at his coming. Then comes the end. So according to Paul, the coming of the bridegroom and all those who are Christ's was tied together. That's when they would receive their inheritance. And that's everything that I see as well. There's no argument there. I would never look at a place like Matthew 22 and the symbolic parable of the wedding feast, knowing that there's two other accounts of that same parable in Luke and also Matthew that show a complete filling and a door closed and a message going to those highways before the wedding, not after. All right, in order to take that view on Matthew 22, one would have to say that, yes, the wedding occurred, the bridegroom came, all those who are Christ received it at that time, but then the message was being taken again to highways and byways, which makes no sense because, again, what would be that message, folks? What would be the message at that point? First of all Israel was already saved by that point. That included the fullness of the nations. Who do you think the highways and the byways are, folks? It's crystal clear. That's the fullness of the nations, right? That would have all taken place. So what's the second gospel? What's 2.0? Is it, hey, all Israel was saved, which included the fullness of the nations, but you can be saved too, like kind of like in a second wave or something? Or maybe you're forgiven from Israel's law that you didn't know you ever had? Or let's see, maybe you're being saved from general death and the mission is that Jesus saved you from that? I don't know. There's so many different ideas and speculation on the gospel and what it's saving people from and everything. But the bottom line is it was saving from the curse of the law, the book of law. That's it. And notice that Jesus says that at his coming in that generation, he would judge each man according to his works. All right? Remember that because I'm going to show you something here. Okay? But let's see. The point is, okay, let's go back to Luke for a second and try to wrap this up. In Luke's version, the invitation to go to the streets and highways and byways is coming before the marriage supper. In Matthew 25's version, the invitation to go to the highways and byways and gather in and fill the hall came before the supper, and when the supper came and the bridegroom came, the door was shut. So what's going on with Matthew 22? Okay. I think that it's just understood incorrectly. Maybe it's translated incorrectly. Maybe it's not supposed to be totally chronological. But we know there's only one burning up of the city, right? I mean, who's going to argue that another city is going to be burned up? who's going to argue that Old Covenant Jerusalem wasn't the mother of all harlots of Revelation? Who would argue that? Who would argue that it's not the camp of the saints, right? Or the city, or the great city of Revelation? Who would argue that? Okay? And again, remember, the fullness of the Gentiles comes in before the end. This gospel of the kingdom will go to all nations, and then the end will come. If that isn't the end, the fall of Jerusalem, then what end is it? The end of the whole world? No, of course not, because the Bible doesn't speak of that. Everything was imminent in those days. Okay? So I would never go against the hundreds of New Testament scriptural references and proof texts that show a clear conclusion and a clear end, and just cling to this one small portion in Matthew 22 and say that it's clearly my hope. That just isn't wise to me. But let's address the other part of this man's question really quickly and move on from this. He also asked, he was trying to tie Revelation chapter 20 in with Matthew 22. Now, first of all, the only thing I can say about Revelation 20 is if that's where you're going to make a case, you're probably not going to do very well, because that is by far the most wackadoodle, symbolic, otherworldly chapter in the entire Bible. Okay? New Testament for sure. So trying to prove a case based on solely that and one shaky parable from Matthew 22, it's not going to do so well. But I think Mark Johns is smart enough to know the full body and overwhelming preponderance of evidence that suggests that IO is the proper viewpoint. So I don't think that he's gonna argue this very much once he understands it. But in Revelation 20, just to give you a quick idea here, because his argument was that, well, if you look at the portion that says, now when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan will be released, blah, blah, blah. I believe that he's saying that could be that second time frame, I guess, of Matthew 22. Hold on, let me see if I can find that little email I got from YouTube. Hold on. Let's see. Bear with me a moment. Okay, so he's believing, I guess, that if there was a continuation of the gospel beyond AD 70, wouldn't this match Revelation 20 around verses 7 and forward? Now, when the 1,000 years have expired, Satan will be released. He'll go out to deceive. Then they'll go up. The earth of the camp will be surrounded, and the beloved city, and fire will come down out of heaven and devour them. The devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire, blah, blah, blah. Then I saw a great white throne and him who sat on it, and I saw a dead standing before him, and they were judged according to the books, each man according to his works. Then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. So his argument is, couldn't this in Revelation 20 be tied to post AD 70 and somehow work? Well, no, I'm sorry. It just cannot. Because, first of all, we know that Christ was ruling and reigning during the last days, right? Paul says he is now reigning until all enemies are put under his feet, the last one being defeated is death. And notice in 1 Corinthians 15, when he talks about Christ coming soon and all those who are Christ will be raised at his coming, and then comes the end. Notice what he says takes place at his coming and the end. He says that death would be defeated and Hades would be destroyed, right? Well, that's exactly what Revelation 20:11 shows, So it shows the city being burned up and destroyed. We know when that happened, right? It shows Satan, who we know is the Jews, right? Paul is very clear, and others are very clear, that the Jews and the adversaries was the Satan, the objectors, the adversaries. They were the ones who opposed the gospel, right? They were the brood of vipers, right? And then it shows a great white throne, and we see this judgment taking place of each man according to his works. Well, folks, what did Jesus say in Matthew 16:27? He said, "Truly I say, there are some standing here who will not taste death before the Son of Man comes and judges each man according to his works." So I have to ask you, is the judgment according to works of Matthew 16 different than this judgment according to works of Revelation 20? Of course not. We know that the judgment according to works was the final judgment. It was when Christ would come and judge each man according to his works. And he said it would take place in that generation, and before some standing there died. And here we have Revelation 20 confirming that same judgment according to works, and also reminding us 20 times in the book that all these events were about to take place. They were near at hand, shortly to come to pass, yada, yada, yada. Notice, though, they also talk about events that already took place. It says events that took place, are taking place, and will shortly come to pass. The one thing it doesn't say is that these are events about hundreds, if not thousands of years in the universe, in the future. That's the one thing it doesn't say. But it says that they were events that were either already took place, taking place, or about to take place, shortly to come to pass. And notice that death and Hades are cast into the lake of fire here in Revelation 20 at this judgment according to works. Well, Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15, those of us who are alive and remain, or we shall not all sleep. In other words, we will not all taste death, but we will be changed in the twinkling of an eye, caught up together with him, where we will forever be with the Lord. And that's the point that Paul said death and Hades would have no sting and would be defeated. So what I just did there is I tied Revelation 20, verses 11 to 15, which, by the way, come after the fiery burning of the city. And I tied that to what Paul said would take place at the coming of the Lord. Death and Hades would be defeated. And I tied that to when Jesus said the judgment according to works would take place in that generation and before some standing there died. And of course, lest we forget, the very next chapter in Revelation chapter 21, let me go there, shows all things made new. So this is the final picture, folks. The inheritance of that New Jerusalem, that is the final hoorah. There is nothing after that. Nothing in the story comes after that. If you look at what comes before that, you have the burning of the city, you have Satan being destroyed, you have the great white throne judgment, the judgment according to works, the death and Hades being destroyed, and then finally, the last thing that takes place is this New Jerusalem that only has the 12 tribes' names written on it, by the way. Okay? And there's no temple in it. The glory of the Lord will be its light. And then we see him say, and I will be their God and they will be my people. A statement that's only attributed to Israel probably 50 or 60 times in the Old Testament, by the way, that statement, I will be their God and they will be my people. That's just sort of like the cherry on top for me. That's the culmination of the whole story. God fulfilled his promise to Israel. That's what that means. But let's see, I'm just reading through this here. But yeah, so the point is that this is the New Jerusalem. That's what that's what these last two chapters are. So if those are the final two chapters, then everything that Revelation 20 talks about must come before that. In other words, if the inheritance of the city, the New Jerusalem, is the final picture, that's when the curtain comes down and it's over, then everything that we see in Revelation 20, the judgment, the burning of the city, yada, 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 all that has to come before it. All that has to precede that. Because it makes no sense to have a judgment and another burning of the city and another this, another that, after the New Jerusalem was already inherited. That doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense to say that there's a wedding feast that goes on for all eternity, right? Where are we getting that from? Like as if this wedding feast just keeps going for all eternity and everybody just comes into it. Well, when is the door shut? Right? When is the door shut, if that's the case? Because the door is clearly shut in that account, in that parable. So taking the Matthew 22 and Revelation 20 defeats IO approach is just not going to get you very far, because IOers look at the full body of evidence, the preponderance of evidence, and we do not cling to loophole passages. We do not say that, yes, Matthew 22 in the middle of that chapter is where everybody today can cling to for hope. No, no, no. We say that this is a very tight story. It's not hard. It's simple. And that's as basic and as simple as it gets, folks. Revelation, everything that was about to take place was at hand. Nothing was going to be delayed thousands of years in the future. We know that reign of Christ was taking place in the last days because Paul said he was ruling and reigning until all enemies were defeated. And that's precisely when his ruling and reigning ends. It's when death and Hades is defeated in Revelation. So it all adds up. At his coming, death and Hades would be defeated. At his coming in Revelation, death and Hades would be defeated. Therefore, we know that his reign had to take place prior to his coming. Folks, I hope you all have a great Fajaz day. Give this one a like, a Ruski if you enjoyed it, and we'll catch you on that flip side. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.